What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. How a single battle and one young pharaoh turned Egypt into a superpower. Across the Levant in the 15th century BC, cities were rising up against freshly installed Pharaoh Thutmose III. It would be the make or break test of his new power and if he could maintain it. The death of Queen Hatshepsut opened the door to rebellion in the Levant. After 22 years in power, she disappeared from history and Thutmose III occupied the throne of Egypt alone. The Mitanni Empire and Kadesh's rulers helped a group of Canaanite city-states rebel against the new pharaoh. It would come to a head in the walled city of Megiddo, in what today is Israel. The city, which is on the plain of Esdraelon, was able to control two important trade routes, one that connected to the coast and the other that went north to Kadesh. As this was Thutmose's first military campaign, the pressure on him was considerable. The route to Megiddo. According to the large propaganda inscription on the walls of Akhmenu, the temple of Thutmose III at Karnak, the young pharaoh gathered his men and started marching from the border fortress of Jaru in the eastern delta to face that powerful enemy. There is no direct information on the number of soldiers mobilized, although most scholars estimate they probably numbered in the thousands. Nor is it known if the entire army set out from Egypt, or if units that were already stationed in Asian territory were incorporated later. Is there really a hidden city beneath the pyramids of Egypt? It took 10 days for the troops to travel the so-called Way of Horus, north of Sinai, and reach Gaza. The distance is around 125 miles, which indicates that the soldiers marched an average of 12.5 miles a day. From Gaza they advanced to the enclave of Yeum, about 25 miles from Megiddo. There, the pharaoh discussed the situation with his officers and decided which of the three existing routes to Megiddo would be best. The northern route crossed the lands of Zefti, the southern route would take them close to Tanakh, the central and most dangerous route would send them through the narrow Aruna Pass. The Annals of Thutmose III, a propagandistic record of his military campaigns inscribed in the temple of Ammonius Re at Karnak, details how Thutmose handles the decision. He was urged not to force them to take the Aruna Pass by his generals. Let our victorious Lord march by the road he wishes, but let him not oblige us to go by the most perilous route. However, Thutmose was determined to defy his enemies and demonstrate his fearlessness by traveling the most perilous route. He said, "My Majesty will march by this Aruna road," in an oath made by the sun god Ammonius Re. He also determined that he himself would lead the army through the narrow pass. "None shall march on this road in front of my Majesty," and when the time came he himself did march at the head of his army, showing the way with his own steps. He chose a route that was just over 8 miles long and, in some places, only 30 feet wide. With steep walls on either side, it was the perfect place for the enemy to ambush an advancing army from above, as there was no room for maneuver. However, the enemy had only stationed soldiers on the other two paths, presuming that the Egyptians would never put themselves in such peril. Thutmose's army was able to march the route through the Aruna Pass in one day without any problem. To the surprise of the adversary's troops stationed near Megiddo, the soldiers entered the Chena Valley. The last missing tomb from this wealthy Egyptian dynasty has been found. The Egyptian advance. At dawn the following day the Egyptian army was mobilized, dividing and deploying in 3 large units that advanced in crescent formation toward an encampment of Asian forces to the south of Megiddo. The inscription at Karnak records that the southern wing of His Majesty's army was at a hill south of the Chena Brook, and the northern wing to the northwest of Megiddo, while His Majesty was in their center, Ammonius protecting his person in the tumult, and the strength of Seth pervading his limbs. That maneuver sparked panic among the enemy warriors. Many of them abandoned their tents and rushed toward Megiddo. The pharaoh's troops set about plundering their camp, which allowed many of the Asian forces to escape. Those inside Megiddo who were protecting the city carried some Asian commanders to safety above the city walls. Others must have run northward to get as far away from the Egyptian troops as possible. The chronicles point out with a certain bitterness that if the soldiers of Thutmose III had pursued the fleeing troops in that phase of the confrontation, the victory would have been quick and definitive. When they, the enemy chiefs, saw His Majesty overwhelming them, They fled headlong to Megiddo with terrified faces, abandoning their horses, their chariots of gold and silver, so as to be hoisted up into the town by pulling at their garments. For the people had shut the town behind them, and they now lowered garments to hoist them up into the town. Now if His Majesty's troops had not set their hearts to plundering the possessions of the enemies, they would have captured Megiddo at this moment. This portion was less of a battle, and more like a series of skirmishes with the Egyptians on the offensive. Siege and victory. Faced with the impossibility of taking the city by assault, the Egyptians decided to besiege it, building a series of fortifications with wood they obtained by felling trees in the surrounding area. The annals of Thutmose III show how he emphasized the strategic importance of conquering Megiddo. Every prince of every northern land is shut up within it. The capture of Megiddo is the capture of 1,000 cities. Finally, after 7 months of siege, the city surrendered. Megiddo's ruler was one of the enemy leaders captured inside. The Prince of Kadesh, commander-in-chief of the Asian coalition, did however manage to escape. An extraordinary booty. The written sources preserve a long and detailed list of the booty obtained after the conquest of Megiddo. They indicate that there were 83 enemy dead and 340 prisoners, but these figures may only include individuals who were seen as significant. Apart from herds, provisions and other objects, the Egyptian army took 2,041 horses, 924 chariots, among which were the chariots carved in gold belonging to the rulers of Kadesh and Megiddo, 200 sets of armor and 502 composite bows. These bows, of Mesopotamian origin, were very expensive and highly sought after. The body armor, made of hardened leather or bronze mail, was innovative at that time. There is no mention of helmets, although their use was widespread during the rule of Thutmose III. This is demonstrated both by the lists of tributes from Asia and by the paintings in some private Theban tombs in which foreigners paying tribute are shown wearing helmets. Myth and might. The immediate consequence of the victory was the consolidation of pharaonic control over much of what is today Israel and the Palestinian territories. The stunning victory and expansion of the Pharaoh's control would live in the Egyptian imagination as the beginning of a new era of regional greatness. General Jehuti, appointed governor of the conquered areas by Thutmose, would later be immortalized as the hero in an ancient Egyptian tale, the taking of Joppa. Recounting how Jehuti used his ingenuity to conquer the city of Joppa, modern-day Jaffa, near Tel Aviv, Israel, by smuggling soldiers into the city hidden in baskets, this story preceded the Trojan horse plot device used in Homer's epic poem The Iliad by centuries. It is also a likely source for the Arabic folk tale Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, in which the eponymous thieves attempt to smuggle themselves into a house in jars of lamp oil. Beyond inspiring great stories, the Megiddo triumph forged new political and diplomatic realities across the region. The new Canaanite territory provided a closer starting point for Egypt to launch future campaigns into Mesopotamia. In an effort to win the pharaoh's favor, monarchies in the Near East sent opulent gifts and ambassadors to Egypt's capital, Thebes, upon hearing of the impressive victory. These crocodile mummies are unraveling a mystery. Following his victory, Thutmose III leveraged his position to expand Egypt's power in Asia through an ambitious program of conquests in Syria. 16 additional campaigns are mentioned in the annals that are inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Ammonius-Re at Karnak. In some cases, however, no specifics have been preserved. These military operations took place between 1454 and 1437 BC and can be divided into distinct phases. The first phase involved the conquest of important port cities, such as Alaza and Simra, to facilitate transport to and from Egypt and provide storage points. The second phase saw the occupation of a large portion of central Syria, reducing Kadesh's strength. The third phase consisted of a direct attack on Mitannian territories, while the fourth phase included a series of campaigns aimed at suppressing uprisings in certain conquered territories. Even accounting for Thutmose's campaign of self-mythologization, and the inevitable exaggeration that is built into the claims and boasts of the annals of Thutmose III, many scholars view the details of this account as a reliable source. In fact, one of the earliest well-documented battles in history is the Battle of Megiddo. This major turning point not only expanded Egyptian territory but also marked the first solo success of one of the greatest military leaders in ancient Egypt. In the 15th century BC, cities across the Levant were protesting the newly installed Pharaoh Thutmose III. It was a turning point in Egypt's imperial destiny and the test that would either make or break his new reign. The death of Queen Hatshepsut, who had ruled for 22 years, created a power vacuum and triggered a series of rebellions in the region. The Mitanni Empire and rulers of Kadesh supported a coalition of Canaanite city-states in a revolt that threatened Egyptian hegemony. The focal point of this uprising was Megiddo, a fortified city strategically located in present-day Israel on the plain of Esdraelon. Controlling two vital trade routes, one to the Mediterranean coast and the other north toward Kadesh, Megiddo held not only military but immense economic importance. As this was Thutmose's inaugural military campaign, the stakes were enormous. A failure could embolden Egypt's enemies, undermine internal support, and relegate Egypt to a minor power. However, victory may signal a new era of dominance. According to the monumental inscriptions on the walls of Akhmenu, the temple of Thutmose III at Karnak, the young pharaoh gathered his forces at Charu, a frontier fortress in the eastern Nile Delta. Although the exact number of troops is unclear, historians estimate his forces numbered in the tens of thousands, comprising infantry, archers, and charioteers. It is still up for debate whether all units marched from Egypt or joined from Asian garrisons. The army took 10 days to traverse the 125-mile Way of Horus, route across northern Sinai, reaching Gaza by averaging 12.5 miles a day. From there, they moved to Yeum, 25 miles south of Megiddo. It was here that Thutmose convened his officers to choose one of three potential invasion routes. The northern route passed through Zefti, the southern through Tanakh. The central Aruna Pass was the shortest but also the most perilous, a narrow defile only 30 feet wide in places, hemmed in by steep cliffs. His generals implored him to avoid Aruna, fearing ambush. But Thutmose said, "My Majesty will march by this Aruna road," in a bold leadership and divine favor declaration, swearing by the sun god Ammonius Re. He even insisted that he take charge of the column. This audacious choice proved inspired. The enemy had stationed forces only on the other two routes, believing no army would dare the Aruna Pass. Thutmose's gamble paid off. His troops emerged unscathed into the China Valley, stunning the enemy near Megiddo. The Egyptians divided into three crescent-shaped wings at dawn. The southern wing positioned on a hill south of China Brook, the northern to the northwest of Megiddo, and Thutmose himself stood at the center, flanked by standards and protected by the invoked power of Ammonius and Seth. The sudden appearance of the Egyptian army triggered chaos. Enemy soldiers fled in panic, abandoning tents, weapons, and even ornate chariots of gold and silver. Some managed to scale Megiddo's walls with the aid of garments lowered by defenders, but most were scattered or captured. Had the Egyptians pressed the attack instead of looting the camp, the city might have fallen that very day. Instead, Thutmose was forced to begin a protracted siege. The Egyptians cut down trees and constructed wooden fortifications, encircling the city. For 7 grueling months the siege held. The annals of Thutmose III dramatize the significance of this victory. The capture of Megiddo is the capture of 1,000 cities. It was a strategic and symbolic victory when the city gave in. The ruler of Megiddo was captured, though the prince of Kadesh, architect of the rebellion, escaped. The victory at Megiddo provided the Egyptians with a staggering bounty. According to records, the army captured 2,041 horses, 924 chariots, 200 suits of armor, and 502 composite bows of Mesopotamian design, coveted for their range and power. Among the chariots were those of the Kadesh and Megiddo royalty, adorned with gold and silver. The troops also took livestock, grain, tents, and high-ranking prisoners, perhaps 340 individuals considered strategically important. Armor made of hardened leather and early forms of bronze mail demonstrated the technological sophistication of the enemy and the rewards of conquest. Even though art and tribute scenes from Theban tombs point to their use, helmets are curiously absent from the records. Megiddo's fall was more than a single victory. It reshaped Egypt's political destiny. The Near East was shocked by Thutmose's display of determination and brilliance. Previously hesitant city-states rushed to pay tribute. Annual tributes began flowing into Egypt, swelling its coffers and legitimizing Thutmose as the supreme ruler not only of Egypt but of a sprawling empire. Over the next 2 decades, Thutmose would launch 16 more campaigns into Syria and Palestine, pushing Egyptian influence as far as the Euphrates. The height of Egyptian imperialism was attained during his rule. Administration and infrastructure followed military conquest. Egyptian scribes documented every aspect, including the collection of tribute and taxes and the integration of conquered regions into a centralized bureaucratic structure. Fortresses were established. Local rulers were retained but kept under tight control through hostage diplomacy and annual inspections. Long-term dominance rather than short-term plunder was guaranteed by this systemic strategy. Megiddo, once a threat, now stood as a linchpin in Egypt's vast imperial web. Trade routes that brought cedar from Lebanon, tin from Anatolia, and luxury goods from Mesopotamia were secured by Egyptian hegemony over the Levant. The wealth helped fund monumental architecture back home, temples at Karnak, the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and the sanctuaries that glorified Thutmose's divine rule. Thutmose III was a visionary statesman as well as a general. He employed propaganda, commissioning extensive inscriptions, reliefs, and temple carvings that depicted him smiting enemies, riding victorious into battle, and receiving tribute from every corner of the known world. These images served not only as boasts, but also as instruments for establishing national identity and divine kingship. He wrote about Egypt as a chosen land with a godly pharaoh as its ruler. Education, administration, and theology were reformed to reinforce this worldview. Religious life, especially the cult of Ammonius, expanded dramatically under Thutmose's reign. The god Ammonius Re was cast as the universal deity, protector of pharaohs and guarantor of order. Priests of Ammonius grew in power and wealth, temples received extravagant endowments, and religious festivals cemented the relationship between the people and the divine monarchy. This centralization of spiritual and temporal power further elevated Egypt above its regional rivals. In retrospect, Megiddo was not just a military victory, it was a fulcrum on which the fate of nations pivoted. The youthful Thutmose had gambled everything on a single march, a narrow pass, and the ferocity of his soldiers. What he won was nothing less than an empire. The battle marked the dawn of a golden age, establishing a precedent of Egyptian dominance that would echo across centuries. The pharaoh who dared Aruna had changed the world beyond Egypt's borders as well. How a single battle and one young pharaoh turned Egypt into a superpower. In the 15th century BC, cities across the Levant were protesting the newly installed Pharaoh Thutmose III. Whether he could maintain Egypt's dominance or succumb to the chaos of an empire that was falling apart would be the ultimate test of his leadership during this rebellion. After reigning as sole pharaoh and co-regent for 22 years, Queen Hatshepsut's death created a power vacuum that Egypt's adversaries sought to exploit. The Mitanni Empire, a formidable rival in Mesopotamia, and the rulers of Kadesh, a powerful city-state in Syria, saw an opportunity to weaken Egypt by inciting rebellion among the Canaanite city-states under Egyptian control. The fortified city of Megiddo, which is in what is now Israel, was the conflict's flashpoint. Megiddo controlled 2 crucial trade routes, one that led to the Mediterranean coast and one that went north to Kadesh. It was on the strategically important plain of Esdraelon. For Thutmose III, this was not just a military campaign. It was a defining moment that would determine whether Egypt remained a dominant force or faded into obscurity. The road to rebellion. When Thutmose III ascended the throne as sole ruler after Hatshepsut's death, the vassal states in the Levant saw an inexperienced young pharaoh and seized their chance to break free from Egyptian dominance. The Mitanni, who had been expanding their influence in northern Syria, probably supported the rebellion, and the king of Kadesh, a key member of the coalition against Egypt, provided military assistance. The Canaanite cities, eager to reclaim their independence, joined the revolt. For Thutmose III, this was a direct challenge to his authority, one that he could not ignore. If he failed to crush the rebellion, Egypt's empire would unravel, and its reputation as a military power would be shattered. The expedition to Megiddo. Thutmose III's response was swift and decisive. According to the detailed inscriptions on the walls of the Temple of Ammonius at Karnak, known as the Annals of Thutmose III, the pharaoh mobilized his army and marched from the eastern delta fortress of Jaru toward Gaza, covering approximately 125 miles in just 10 days. This rapid advance demonstrated both the discipline of his troops and his determination to strike before the enemy could fully consolidate their forces. The Egyptian army moved northward from Gaza to Yeum, a staging area approximately 25 miles from Megiddo. Thutmose had to make his first major tactical decision here: which way to go to the rebellious city. 3 possible paths lay before him: the northern route, passing through the town of Zefti; the southern route, which ends close to Tanakh; the central route, a narrow and treacherous pass through the Aruna Valley. Thutmose's generals urged caution, advising against the Aruna route, which was dangerously narrow, some sections only 30 feet wide, and ideal for an ambush. The enemy, they reasoned, would expect the Egyptians to take one of the safer paths and would have stationed troops accordingly. However, Thutmose overruled them with the boldness that would define his reign, declaring, "My Majesty will march by this Aruna road." In an oath sworn by Ammonius III, he insisted on taking the most perilous path, personally leading his army through the pass. The Egyptians were unharmed on the other side, taking the Canaanite forces completely by surprise, and the enemy had no idea of his audacity. The Battle of Megiddo. As dawn broke, Thutmose III arrayed his forces in a crescent formation, with the southern wing positioned near the Chena Brook, the northern wing northwest of Megiddo, and himself at the center, symbolically protected by Ammonius and imbued with the strength of Seth. The sudden appearance of the Egyptian army sent the enemy into panic. Many abandoned their positions and fled toward Megiddo, leaving behind their weapons, chariots, and even their leaders. The annals recount with frustration that the Egyptian soldiers, distracted by the riches in the abandoned camp, failed to pursue the fleeing enemy, allowing many to escape into the city. Had they pressed the attack immediately, Megiddo might have fallen in a single day. Instead, the battle transitioned into a siege. Thutmose III ordered his troops to construct a wooden palisade around the city, cutting off all supply lines. The siege lasted 7 grueling months, but eventually Megiddo's defenders, weakened by starvation and desperation, surrendered. The city's ruler was captured, though the Prince of Kadesh, the mastermind behind the rebellion, managed to escape.